Welcome to Assembly Calendar. I'm Mike Friesen. With us for our program today, Assemblyman Will Barclay. Will Barclay represents the 124th Assembly District. In New York State, the 124th District includes parts of Oswego and Onondaga counties. We want to thank you folks throughout Central New York for joining us for our program today. Will Barclay, nice to see you.
Mike, good to be here.
I was thinking we could spend all 15 minutes that we have assigned to us right now talking about the budget talks and how those are going. The budget's due to be in place by the end of March. March 31st is the end of the fiscal year. Talks right now suggest that that deadline will be met. Might even be an early budget this year. We'll talk about that. We'll get Will Barclay's opinion on that. But there's something else going on here that's highly significant, although I think kind of unknown to the general public and kind of misunderstood. It's called redistricting or reapportionment. Something that only happens in Albany every 10 years. Maybe that's part of the mystery. It's based on census results and the redrawing of all the representatives' lines, the assembly lines, the Senate lines, even the congressional lines, all need to be tweaked. I guess because of population shifts in the state. Let's talk about that.
Well, that's right. I mean, it's not just, as you said, it's not just state lines. These are also affect congressional lines. And as you know, population goes up and down and throughout the country. Some states gain population, some states lose population. New York State, unfortunately, has been losing population. A lot of because of the reasons of some of the stuff, unfortunately, we do down here. But
that we'll be talking about with the budget,
we'll talk
right?
about that with the budget. That's right, unfortunately. But in any event, redistricting, as you said, comes up every 10 years. The legislature has to reset the lines, and obviously in the Senate and the Assembly, no matter what the population is, we're still going to have 150 Assembly members. I guess the Senate actually may increase to 63 members, but the changes, how the districts are drawn. So this has been a huge issue. Obviously, legislators get concerned because all of a sudden they could be representing a district and have the population shift, and they could get a whole new district for the next decade. So it's obviously an issue that's near and dear to legislators' hearts, even though the general population probably isn't as aware of it or is concerned about it.
And in fact, the lines, not only are the lines important to the legislature because it determines where you represent, which communities are represented together, but the lines are also drawn by the legislature.
Right, and that is a huge point of contention, unfortunately, and you've heard that term, gerrymandering, that came back from, I think, from the 19th century or 18th century from Massachusetts, and its fact is they're manipulated, these redrawing the lines, and it can be used for political advantage for one party or the other, depending on who's in control. And that's one of the big criticisms I've had of the process since I've come in. Believe it or not, I came in right after the last redistricting 10 years ago. And one of the problems is the majorities in both houses like to draw these lines so they can either sustain their majority or increase their numbers. And it's not always based on kind of a historical basis or a homogeneous basis of what the district should be like or a geographic type basis. It's really very often done politically. So one of the things we've advocated for, at least in our conference, and certainly I've been a strong proponent of, is the fact that we need an independent redistricting commission that can go and look at these lines and take in account, the type of district you have, the geographical line, the historical line, stuff that would make sense, and try the best they can to take politics out of it. Unfortunately, Mike, it doesn't look like that's what's going to happen this year. Looks like the legislature, again, is going to take over the lines. The governor's been threatening to veto whatever lines the governor comes up with, but now I'm understanding there may be a big deal involved with the budget, as we'll talk about, redistricting and a few other issues like DNA database and some other issues. So
one of the talks that's going around is that maybe if the governor can't get his way on an independent body doing this year's lines, because they need to be done.
Surely,
there's a deadline
soon.
at the middle of March where they need to be in place because the elections are coming up, as we know from watching what's going on with presidential politics right now. So if he can't get that done for this year, maybe he would somehow get an agreement that there would be an independent body drawing these lines 10 years from now and into the future. That would still be a huge deal when it comes to setting up the political landscape here in the state of New York.
Yeah, without a doubt. And I think it's important something like that gets into place, particularly for upstate New York. As you know, the Assembly is dominated by downstate interests, particularly out of New York City, and they've been drawing more and more districts down there to increase their voice and the city's voice in the New York State Assembly at the expense of upstate. So I think if we had an independent redistricting commission. We'd have to amend the Constitution, I understand, under the piece of legislation that is being proposed out there by the governor and others. Maybe that would actually make the population, if there are population shifts, at least take, again, politics out of it and give upstate a stronger voice, or at least not have us losing our voice at the expense, or New York City gain their voice at the expense of upstate's voice.
There are some cities that are divided in half by these lines, whether it's an assembly line or a senator line. Counties, some counties have several different representatives. Some representatives represent up to 7 different counties. You know, it's not necessarily in the best interest of the communities right now.
Absolutely. And again, as I said, we have the state legislative lines, but the other thing we have is the congressional lines. And now that we're moving up the primary date, which we had to pursuant to a federal court case, the time for actually passing petitions and people getting on the ballot to run for Congress has gotten very compressed. So as a result, the federal courts have also taken over the redrawing of the congressional lines, which traditionally has been the duty of the legislature, state legislature. And these lines have just come out. You maybe saw the special master came out with some proposed congressional lines, and that really changes a lot. For instance, in my area, particularly Oswego County, gets split in two. The eastern part of the district would go in with Oneida all the way down to Broome County, believe it or not. The western part of Oswego County would be put in with Onondaga County, I think Wayne and Cayuga County. It's a little bit more of a compact district. But where I live, you go all the way down 81, all the way down to the bottom of the state. So that would really be a big change. I don't think historically, at least in my memory or knowledge, ever did part of Oswego County get pushed in with the southern tier. It seems we always tend to go north in the North Country. So it's really a big shift that those lines tend to hold.
Well, it's going to be an interesting thing to watch, and especially, again, we'll keep an eye on whether or not we'll see an independent commission in New York's future. 10 years may seem like a long time away, but you know, you blink your eyes sometimes and it goes a lot faster than what you might think.
I have an 11-year-old. I can't believe he's 11 years old, so I matched him to redistricting.
So he was right in before
the
lines were drawn the last
time. Yeah, he got in there. That's right.
Let's talk now about where the budget talks are right now. Again, there seems to be an idea that this budget will be done on time this year. It was on last year for the first time in about 20 years.
Yeah.
Or it may even be early. It's been quiet. There hasn't been a lot of filibustering and loudness and debate. It's been a very quiet budget debate.
Well, let's face it. First of all, the state's still suffering from really some very tough revenue constraints. We have not been getting the revenue in the door in the Treasury as fast as we have in years past. So that always puts some, handcuffs or constraint on what we can do in the budget. Secondly, as you recall, last fall, we took some steps to modify the tax code, which addressed a lot of the shortfall issues that we're going to have budgetarily this year. So some of the big steps that we might have taken care of about this time of year, in a couple of weeks, we took care of last fall that I think helps a lot. Now, I'm a little, now that I've been here a little bit, I get a little skeptical when I really don't believe it's going to be an early budget. I mean, I've been here long enough to know there's negotiations that go on, and very often we wait until the last minute just as a bargaining tool to try to get something done in the budget. So I'd be suspect to say it's going to be done early. Whether it can be on time, that's another matter. There is, and I'd say to the governor's credit, a bit of professionalism that's been brought back to Albany that was missing in previous governors, and as a result of that, I think there is a political will and maybe a bipartisanshipness, if that's such a word, out there that might allow an on-time budget. So that being said, but we still have some very big issues, and they always come down to a lot of the same things that come down in budget years: school aid and health care. And those continue to be the big issues. I know I'm hearing from a lot of my school districts, especially, which I represent a lot of low-wealth school districts, and having even flat funding or small increase in funding just isn't going to do it because of the expenses that they're suffering from right now. We talked about earlier gas prices, all these expenses keep going up for school districts. Well, at the same time, if they get level state aid or even cuts in state aid, it actually really causes a lot of hardship on them.
They've seen cuts in state aid the last few years. There's been talk that the state may see some increased revenues more than what it saw last year, and that some of that may go to school aid. But there's concerns about inequities in the distribution, that not every school district will get the same percentage increase, if indeed there is even a percentage increase.
Absolutely, Mike. So, for instance, I have a few school districts that are reliant 95% on state aid. They don't have a tax base there that they can all of a sudden raise taxes locally and try to make up whatever loss they get from the state. For instance, you take a Long Island school that has a $30 million budget, a $35 million budget, $300,000 worth of state aid isn't that critical to them. You take a school like a Hannibal that I represent, $300,000 makes all the difference in the world. So what we have to do is get a more equitable school aid formula out there. We got to start driving school dollars, state school dollars, to the schools that really need them, and obviously have to cut back on schools that aren't so dependent on state dollars.
And of course, schools are dealing with that 2% property tax cap that was passed by the legislature a year or so ago. The counties, towns, villages are facing that same property tax cap that was put in place that's impacting schools. Counties have to deal with Medicaid costs, just like the state does. You mentioned health care as being one of the other, every year comes up as part of the budget talks, because education and budget are the two biggest parts of any state budget.
Without a doubt. And let's be straight. I support the cap because our property taxes were simply out of control, continue to be out of control. But as we said before, if we're going to put a property tax cap on, which is really a levy cap, we have to also couple that with mandate relief, so some of the schools can get relief. It's very hard to do a budget when the state's telling you, how you got to spend 90% of your budget. It doesn't give you a lot of wiggle room, and then the state says, well, you can't raise any additional revenue either. Good luck to you, and that's really tough.
Good luck. Don't forget to write.
Yeah, sorry. So it really is a challenge for them, Mike.
Yeah.
So, and there's a $250 million pot of money that's being proposed by the governor for competitive grants. I would like to I'm a little suspicious about competitive grants because you never know how those things might potentially get manipulated politically, frankly.
No,
and I've seen them go to other parts of the, I know, believe it.
I think Simon Cowell's on the judging panel for those to make those determinations.
Right. So I'd like to see that money get taken out of the competitive grants and really driven on a need basis to school districts, particularly, again, low-wealth school districts.
And one of the other things that has me skeptical as to getting a budget, especially done early, is this call for pension reform. I mean, this has the labor unions up in arms, and, that's not... If there's anything politicians don't want to do, they don't want to get labor upset, but, the governor is saying this has got to happen. The costs of running these pensions and paying them are not sustainable, and that something's got to give. Something's got to change.
Right.
So he seems set. The union seems dead set against it. That doesn't make me very comfortable that a budget's
that could be done
easy
easily.
Budget this year, no problem at all.
Well, I would say it's not just the governor that are saying it needs pension reform. We're hearing from local government officials, the ones that are on the front lines having to pay these huge pension bills, and the taxpayers. Again, property taxes continue to be high in New York State. One of the drivers of that is pension costs. So as you recall, last year we did do a new tier. We did reform a little bit of the pension system. The governor wants to take it one step further. I think there will be a new tier in pension. I don't think it'll be what the governor is proposing right now. I think it'll be a negotiated compromise on that, where you'll see some additional cost cutting on the defined benefit part of the pension plan. And I think the defined contribution part that the governor's proposing, like the traditional 401k plan, will probably be dropped in the end.
Well, it'll be interesting to see.
We'll see. I could be wrong.
And that's the kind of negotiation that sometimes makes state budgets late. So that's
you got it.
So we'll see. And in our next program, we'll know. We'll either be very close to a budget. Maybe there'll be one done if it's done early.
Let's hope so.
Or we'll be very close, and we'll get an update from you as to where talks are.
Thanks.
But Will Barclay, as always, thanks for joining us this time around, and we'll look forward to getting that update from you next time. And we want to thank you folks too for spending your time with us. We'll be here back again in just a couple weeks to let you folks know what's going on here at the state capitol with Assemblyman Will Barclay. We hope you folks will join us for that, our next edition of Assembly Calendar.